Hello, I'm Stephan Schwartz, and I want to welcome you to the Schwartz Report. This week, I want to talk about something that has become of increasing concern to me, and that is what I'm going to call life, death, and financial inequality. Because I think this is a big issue that almost nobody's talking about, and they should be, because it affects every single one of us, for good or ill. We are a nation of 331.9 million people. And the inequality of affluence in this country is just staggering. I really had not fully appreciated until I dug in and did the research. And of course, as always, at the end of the podcast, you can check in and get the actual research data and the sources that I use to do this, because I really want to emphasize again that this is all entirely fact-based, as bizarre as it is, because financial inequality is grotesque in this country. We have become something very different than the founders intended. Chuck Collins and Josh Hoxie of the Institute of Policy Studies did a lot of research on this that I've dug out using data from both the recently released Forbes 400 and the Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances. They address this issue of inequality. And here are some of the key findings. You're going to find it's unbelievable. As of 2023, there were 735 billionaires in the United States and 22 million millionaires. Now, what does that mean? Well, the 5 wealthiest people in the United States, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Larry Ellison, Warren Buffett, and Bill Gates, have more wealth, just those 5 guys, than the entire bottom half of the American population. That's roughly 166 million people, or about 70 million households. 5 guys are richer than half the country. And the billionaires who make up the full Forbes 400 list own more wealth than the bottom 64% of the US population. An estimated 80 million households, 204 million people. Now, that's just another world from most Americans. The median American family has a net worth of about $80,000, not counting their cars. The Forbes 400 own more wealth than 33 million of these typical families. 1 in 5 households in the United States has 0 or negative net worth, and they're considered underwater households. And they make up an even higher share of households when it's just people of color, particularly Black people, Latino people. More than 30% of Black households and 27% of Latino households have 0 or negative net worth to fall back on. In other words, what you're talking about here is that we got 5 guys who make more each hour than most middle-class Americans make in their lifetime. So when I say we're talking about two different worlds, I mean literally two different worlds. But here's the thing that really set me off. The other day, I was doing research for the monthly Schwartz report that I publish and explore, and I saw a study conducted by the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy. And what they had found was that the lower someone's income, the higher their overall effective state and local tax rate was. That means the richer you are, the lower your taxes, your rate of taxation. To quote them, on average, the lowest income 20% of taxpayers face a state and local tax rate that is nearly 60% higher than the top 1% of the households. Think about that for a minute. In 41 states, the top 1% of families have a lower tax rate than everyone else. In 42 states, the top 1% of earners pay less than the bottom 20%, and in 46 states, the top 1% are taxed at a lower rate than the middle 60%. It's unbelievable. And it is, by the way, quite different than the way this country was founded and the reasons, the purposes that the founders started the country to support. And the more I thought about that, the more I thought about Alexis Charles Henri de Tocqueville, who was a scion of one of the oldest Norman noble families, and he came to the United States in 1831, accompanied by just a friend, Gustave de Beaumont. Officially, he was sent by the French government to study America's prison system. Because in those days, the American prison system was an example at the time of how to do the prison system. Today, we are the largest gulag in the world, over 2 million people in prison, and we're turning it into a profit center we have turned it into a profit center by creating private profit prison systems. Completely different. But de Tocqueville was also interested in just seeing this new country. It had just recently weathered a revolution. This wasn't long after the Constitution was created, 1787. And he saw it as a social experiment whose echoes were still sweeping across Europe because nobody else had tried to do this. And he traveled all over the States with his friend, and they looked at everything that they could find about the country. They spent 9 months observing, reading the local press, talking with Americans, both prominent and just ordinary people. And out of these experiences, de Tocqueville wrote a book called Democracy in America. It is one of the enduring masterpieces of cultural and political observation about democracy and inequity. People still read it. I have a copy and I pulled it out and reread parts of it in order to prepare for this podcast. You might take a look at it. It's really quite an interesting book. And although de Tocqueville was a representative of a culture that worshipped continuity and class differences, he himself saw that democracy offered an opportunity which no one else in Europe did. And he wrote in his book, which I just read, I will quote this, that Americans have a lively faith in the perfectibility of man. They consider society as a body in a state of improvement, humanity as a changing scene in which nothing is or ought to be permanent, as a challenging scene in which nothing is or ought to be structured to the benefit of one particular group. He understood that America was defined in its quest for change by the desire, here it comes, an equality of condition amongst its citizens. An equality of condition amongst its citizens. He described liberty as the ultimate political value and wrote that democracy, in his view, was the irresistible future. His passion stood out as I was reading the book again, was equality. An issue perhaps even more resonant today than it was in the early 19th century. He saw what history has made apparent. Liberty, equality, and the ability to change lie at the core of social fairness. The difference is that to Tocqueville's day, equality was much more emphatically a function of resources. There just wasn't a lot to go around. Even wealthy people didn't have that many things. I went to George Washington's Mount Vernon estate, and I was struck by the fact that by today's standard of wealth, it was very simply furnished. It didn't look anything like Donald Trump's apartment. George Washington lived a simple life that any American today would recognize. Amazing. And it represented the way the founders thought about the country. Benjamin Franklin did not live in an opulent fashion. Thomas Jefferson, although he designed an amazing house, is nothing like the kind of opulence that you would see in all of these wealthy people's houses, except Warren Buffett, who still lives in the same house that he's lived in most of his adult life. So we have become antipodal to the America that the founders had in mind. Let me state it as a fact. The United States has the highest rate of income inequality among all Western cultures. It's so pronounced that it has become notable to other countries. Philip Alston, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights, was sent to the United States to assess the nation's inequality on the basis of data, not politics. And he found that there was not another Western country with financial inequality as pronounced as the United States. And it's getting worse. Why is it getting worse? Because beginning with the Reagan administration, the Republican Party, in service to the wealthy, changed the tax system. In 2017, December 2017, $1.5 trillion in tax cuts were enacted by the Congress, and it overwhelmingly benefited the wealthy and worsened inequality. We structured poverty. It got built in. And with Citizens United, which legalized bribery of public officials, we began to get a different kind of congressperson. If you can think back, well, not even that far, 20, 30 years, there were no Lauren Boeberts. There were no Marjorie Taylor Greens or Matt Gaetzes, Jim Jordans. People ran for Congress, got elected to Congress in service of their citizens that they were going to represent, not the wealthy people who basically gave them the money to buy their offices. The whole Congress changed. We have one of the highest poverty and inequality levels in any of the Organization for Economic Development countries. The Stanford Center on Inequality and Poverty ranks the United States 18th out of 21 wealthy countries in terms of labor markets, poverty rates, safety nets, wealth inequality, and economic mobility. For almost 5 decades, the overall policy response has been neglectful. I don't know any other word. This whole thing has been structured. We are not trying to create equality or fairness in any way through our tax system. We are trying to benefit rich people. It's just that simple. And it plays out in every level. And it has all kinds of implications. The Centers for Disease Control assembled mortality data from around the country and concluded living in the US increasingly is becoming a health risk. Now, most Americans don't know. Americans don't live as long as people in other OECD countries. And by a lot. More than that, red state people live significantly shorter lives than blue state people. State in which I live, the average is 81. Down in Louisiana, 74. It's a big difference. Think of all the things that you have done over the last years represent that difference in life expectancy. And it's getting worse. Life expectancy has dropped for now several years in a row, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. It's a toxic blend of drug, alcohol-related deaths, guns. We have this gun psychosis, and we have more gun deaths There just isn't any other country like it, except for a war. I mean, as I've said in an earlier podcast, the largest cause of death for young people is a bullet in their bodies. Think about that. What kind of country chooses? Doesn't have to happen. Doesn't happen anywhere else. To have its children killed by guns, being murdered by some moron, some political fanatic, some resentful, grudge-filled kid who comes in and shoots a bunch of people, or some political hack who comes in and shoots people. Gun death is a huge problem, and it's unique to the United States. We are also the most obese because we eat a very poor diet. All that food you see advertised on television, don't eat any of it. Pre-prepared food, fast food, all of that results in a level of obesity that is unlike any other country. When you go to another country, in fact, the way you can identify the Americans is that they're obese. You don't see the kind of obesity you routinely see in any shopping mall in America, in any other country. So, poor health care. Our healthcare system is the 37th in the world, although it costs more than anything any other country charges, again, by orders of magnitude. It doesn't affect all, however, and that's why I want to bring this up, because it doesn't affect the rich. While poor and middle-class Americans are dying earlier these days, the wealthiest among us are having unprecedented longevity. It's generally acknowledged by those who study the issues, really get into them, that the American middle class arose from the extensive unionization of the workforce beginning in the 1920s and brought to fruition at the end of World War II, when millions of returning servicemen and women, thanks to programs begun by Franklin Roosevelt and continued and augmented by Harry Truman and the Democrats, became eligible for educational benefits and to be able to buy a house. We deliberately created the middle class. It didn't happen by chance, just as we are now creating poverty. It's not happening by chance. Beginning in the early 50s, these efforts created the vibrant middle class that most of us think is the norm and that made America the envy of the world. And then it stopped. It stopped beginning really seriously with Reagan. And it is a particular Republican phenomenon. It's devastating. There is a marked increase in all-cause mortality of middle-class, white, non-Hispanic men and women in the United States between 1999 and 2013. The change reversed decades of progress in mortality and was unique to the United States. No other rich country saw a similar turnaround. But that's only part of it. The midlife mortality reversal was confined to white non-Hispanics, black non-Hispanics, Hispanics at midlife, those aged over 65, and in every racial and ethnic group, those who were poor. How solid is this? Well, there are dozens of studies. We don't talk about it. You don't hear it described on the corporate television. A media now controlled basically by two companies controlled by oligarchs. I think this is what is driving the intense grievances, hatred that's going on in the United States. Is that people recognize this, but they don't understand why it was caused, what caused it to happen. We are not going to survive as the country we have been unless we change and go back to what the founders intended. And that was a society which fostered well-being and gave everyone a fair chance. Nothing is going to change this but your vote. You must vote Democratic. Not because I particularly espouse the Democrats. As I have told you over and over, I am not interested in political partisanship except anthropologically, like studying a cult or a tribe. What I care about is fostering well-being. And the Republican Party doesn't believe in democracy anymore. They like authoritarianism. Look at what is currently going on. Turn on your television and spend 10 minutes on any news channel. It's very clear. The Republican Party is not interested in supporting equality. They don't want to change the tax codes back to what they used to be. They don't care about democracy. They don't like public education. They're trying to gut healthcare. I don't quite understand why American, particularly American middle class and working class people, don't get that. Why they don't understand that the chance for a better future lies with the Democrats. Not because they're perfect. They have all kinds of problems. But because we are a two-party system. So we have two choices. Third-party candidate's not going to win. So we have two choices. You can choose Democrat, you can choose Republican. Look at the policies that each party represents and decide which one is going to make my life and the life of my children and their children better. It's not complicated. Please take the time to do this. This election is going to change the whole nature of how the country continues, for good or ill. It's up to you and me and our friends. Are we going to do it? I guess we're going to see in November. Thank you.